Welcome to the third video. In this video, I'm going to be introducing Descartes. So in the last two videos, we've talked about the sort of general emergence of the scientific revolution up to Descartes. And in this video, I'm going to be introducing how Descartes fits into that scientific method and introducing the Meditations on First Philosophy, or Descartes' sort of major work that we're going to be reading in the class. So the first thing about the Meditations is just go through and number your paragraphs in the meditation. So I'm going to be referring to paragraphs in the Meditations where you know, I say in meditation 2, in paragraph 10, Descartes says blah, 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 right? And so in order to be able to follow along with what I'm saying, you should just go through and write a little number by each paragraph in the first meditation and then start over in the second and so on, right? So I'm going to be talking about meditation 1, paragraph 2, or meditation 2, paragraph 1, etc. Right? Okay. So to sort of get into talking about Descartes, let me say a bit about how to read the meditation. So on a first impression, it might seem that the meditations are pretty easygoing and that there isn't a lot going on. It's going to be a lot easier reading than Aristotle. I mean, Aristotle, it's like every sentence, every word is a slog, and you got to be like, what is going on here? And you got to really puzzle it out. And Descartes' style isn't like that. Descartes' style, he has a very easy, almost conversational style that can bring you in, but there's a lot going on under the surface. And so it's easy to just kind of glide along on the surface of Descartes' prose without really understanding what's happening. And so you'll notice that there's going to be less reading overall often during the Descartes sections. But I hope that you'll take the Descartes slow and read and reread the bits of Descartes that are assigned. Trying to figure out what's going on under the surface, right? Reflecting, when you finish a paragraph, think to yourself, well, what did he do in that paragraph? Why did he do that, right? Ask yourself both of those questions every time you finish a paragraph, because trust me, in every single paragraph, he's doing something important. Let me say also a bit about the objections and replies. So the meditations were circulated before publication to a bunch of prominent thinkers, a bunch of prominent intellectuals in Descartes' time. And Descartes solicited from these prominent intellectuals replies, questions, objections that he then responded to. And so when the meditations were published, they were published with a ton of objections and replies that were in fact there was much more sort of text than there was in the original meditations. I mean, the sort of body of the work was in the objections and the replies. So although we're going to be focusing on the meditations, we're also going to be looking at the objections and replies, because the way that Descartes responds to the objections is really going to clarify what's going on in the meditations themselves. And so the reason why I had you guys get this Cambridge selected writings of Descartes is I think they've done a really good job of picking out some of the best exchanges in the objections and replies and reprinted those in the volume. And so we're going to sort of be reading the objections and replies reprinted in that volume. And so you're going to have to get yourself a copy of the Cambridge edition selected writings. I don't have a PDF of this, so I can't actually give you a copy of it. I can't send it to you. You're just going to have to buy the book. Okay. So let's keep moving. Let me turn now to what Descartes is up to in the Meditations. So the title of the book is Meditations on First Philosophy. And we're going to want to spend some time trying to understand why Descartes, what he means by calling it Meditations, and what he means by calling it First Philosophy. But before we turn to that, let me say a little bit about how Descartes conceived of his own project, right? So what the new science lacked prior to Descartes, we saw how it got this robust mathematical, unified, mechanical conception of physics and physical nature. But what it lacked that the Aristotelian philosophy had was a metaphysics, a foundation for that physics, a sort of worldview, a conception of reality and our place in reality that backed up that new physics. And so what Descartes wanted to do was provide the new science with a metaphysical foundation. And so that's his general project. And in particular, he took himself to have two tasks. The first was to discredit the metaphysics of the Aristotelians. So that was his negative task. But he also wanted to establish an answer to the question, what is reality most fundamentally? And he wanted this question in a way, what is reality most fundamentally, right? The question of metaphysics. He wanted to answer this in a way that was compatible with the new sciences, that it could support the new sciences. So another term that we're going to encounter in Descartes' writings for metaphysics is first philosophy. This is going to equal, this is just going to be a synonym for metaphysics. But metaphysics, so first philosophy is another term that the Aristotelian philosophers used to refer to metaphysics, the science of reality in its most basic form. Right. So what is reality most fundamentally? The science of reality in its most basic form, that's metaphysics. And it's going to study topics like God, the soul, the nature of matter, or reality, the nature of bodies. So bodies is a synonym for matter, which just means physical stuff, right? Or another word that we're going to be using is corporeal. So corporeal just means bodily. So corpor or corpus, right? You can hear it in our word corpse. And it was just the Latin word for body. And a body is just a physical thing. It's just physical stuff. So the corporeal world is just the world of physical stuff, physical bodies. So don't get confused by that. Don't get confused by that terminology. So, so we'll be talking about the corporeal world, physical stuff, bodies, matter. Those are all, I mean, they're mostly talking about the same physical stuff or the world that is all of that physical stuff together. Okay. So Descartes is writing the Meditations primarily for these Aristotelian philosophers, these philosophers who call metaphysics first philosophy. These scholastic philosophers like Aquinas. You sort of think of Aquinas as like, he's like Aristotle plus Jesus, right? So like Aquinas, he takes this body of Aristotelian science and he says, well, how could this fit with Christianity, with divine revelation about Christ? And he works out a system that is sort of as intricate and developed as Aristotle's system, but now that can fit seamlessly together, he thinks, with divine revelation. So that's Aquinas. More or less. Aquinas is Aristotle plus Jesus. All right. So Descartes is writing to convince philosophers like Aquinas that really they should adopt the new physics, right? And in particular, there are other proponents of the new sciences around, right? But the reason he's not writing for them primarily is he thinks they'll already agree with him by and large, right? And so he doesn't think that he needs to convince them. And so the metaphysics, the meditations, as a work in first philosophy, meditations on first philosophy. So the meditations as a work in metaphysics, that's going to have two aims. It's going to have a positive aim and a negative aim. And the positive aim is to provide a scientific metaphysics that can be a foundation for the new scientific picture of the world, on the basis of which we can establish secure knowledge of the world, of physics, of morals, and of medicine. And so accordingly, so you can see there that this science of metaphysics, this first philosophy, is going to have to do with, it's not just going to be talking about the nature of God or the nature of souls or the nature of matter or physical things. It's also going to be talking about our knowledge of those things. And in the modern period, there isn't really a distinction that's drawn in a strong way between epistemology and metaphysics, in the way that if you're familiar with philosophy today, there's sort of a strong distinction between metaphysics and epistemology, where metaphysics studies what there is and epistemology studies how we can know things. Descartes is going to think of both of these as part of metaphysics, or first philosophy. And he's going to be concerned with how we can have knowledge. So the nature of God and how we can have knowledge of God, the nature of the soul, how we can have knowledge of the soul, or the nature of matter and how we can have knowledge of matter. And this metaphysics, this first philosophy, right, it's first. It comes first, and then we go on to do physics and medicine and mechanics. And so he thinks of metaphysics as the foundation or the roots of the rest of human knowledge. So he'll conceive of the whole of philosophy like a tree, where the roots are metaphysics, the trunk is physics, and the branches emerging from the trunk are all the other sciences, which may be reduced to three principal ones, namely medicine, mechanics, and morals. So we've got all right. we got metaphysics. We've got physics. And we've got, let's see, medicine, mechanics, and morals. Right. So, and this is all of human knowledge, right? So this is the tree of knowledge. Heard of that from anywhere? Anyway, this is the tree of knowledge, according to Descartes. And remember, I mean, in this period, philosophy is just knowledge. So philosophy professors, for example, would teach all sorts of subjects, including what we would now call physics, biology, medicine, morals, geography, mathematics, you know, et cetera, right? So, and so, I mean, so another work that we're going to be looking at, besides the meditations and the objections and replies, is the principles of philosophy. And because philosophy just is all knowledge, what Descartes is concerned with is the principles of knowledge. And this book, The Principles of Philosophy, it covers basically the same ground as Meditations on First Philosophy. I mean, sometimes Aristotle will also speak of knowledge of the building. So sometimes he compares it to a tree, other times to a building, an edifice, and there metaphysics will be the foundation. So metaphysics is going to be the foundation in that picture. And at the start of the same passage, Descartes writes that metaphysics contains the principles of knowledge. Metaphysics contains the principles of knowledge. And what we just saw is that, well, the philosophy is knowledge. So metaphysics is going to contain the principles of philosophy. And so Meditations on First Philosophy, it's no surprise that it covers the same ground as the principles of philosophy. Why? Well, first philosophy is going to include principles of knowledge. What's a principle? Well, a principle, we saw principles back with Aristotle. So with Aristotle, a principle was a beginning or a starting point, or the most basic bit of knowledge out of which the rest of knowledge grows, like the roots in a tree. So in Aristotle, principle translated arche. I think on one of those handouts back there, in one of those past videos, I discussed what an arche is. It's a principle. It's a starting point in knowing. For Aristotle, it was that which was first to nature. It was that which was most basic. And for Descartes, and for Aristotle to some degree too, but it really becomes clear in Descartes, part of the shift towards knowledge. Metaphysics is going to concern both reality and knowledge, so both God and the soul, and it will study how we come to know things, right? And that's really reflected in these titles of these two books that cover a lot of the same ground, The Principles of Knowledge and Meditations on First Philosophy. Okay, in the next video, we'll turn to Descartes' negative aim.